Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something most medieval people couldn't open your mouth without screaming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand before a warped bronze mirror in a small candlelit room, staring at your own reflection through the smoky glass, and your first thought is simple: you probably won't survive this century with all your teeth intact. The flickering candlelight catches the curve of your lips as you try a smile, and you see it, a chip on your front tooth, a faint yellowing, maybe the start of something that feels suspiciously like the end. In the Middle Ages, smiles were luxuries, not social currencies, and the phrase tooth decay was less a condition than a lifestyle. You run your tongue over gritty enamel and realize that every bite of the day's bread has been a small act of rebellion against your own mouth. Bread is life, yes, but medieval bread is also a time bomb. You've baked it with stone-ground flour, which means microscopic shards of grit have hitched a ride from the millstones into your daily loaf. You chew, and those tiny particles scrape against enamel like sandpaper on porcelain, grinding down the defenses of your teeth, meal by meal, decade by decade. It's the Middle Ages' favorite dental plan: erosion by diet. You swallow, wincing slightly, but there's no escape. Everyone eats bread, peasants, monks, nobles, because it's what keeps them alive, and in keeping you alive, it slowly kills your smile. Outside, a rooster crows against the blue chill of dawn. You pull on your rough wool tunic and step into a world that smells of damp hay, smoke, and humanity. The village mill wheel turns slowly, creaking like a giant jaw. You can almost hear it grinding your molars from afar. Down the muddy lane, a blacksmith hammers something metallic, and for a moment you imagine it's your tooth under his anvil. Humor helps, it always has. People in your century joke that losing teeth means you've lived long enough to enjoy the luxury of suffering. You laugh, but carefully too wide a grin might send a crumb flying from a gap that wasn't there last year. It's hard to find a toothbrush, mainly because no one has invented one yet. There are twigs, though. Willow or birch chewed to fray into little brushes, dipped in salt or ash. You rub them along your teeth and pretend it helps. Maybe it does, or maybe you're just polishing the problem. Some nights, when the fire burns low, you sit beside the old miller, who tells stories about how the human body is a map of the soul. Your teeth, he says, poking his own with a grimy finger, show what kind of person you are. Strong teeth, strong faith. You nod politely but can't help noticing that he's missing 3 molars, which makes him sound like a prophet with a whistle. There's a strange kind of truth to his words, though. In a world without mirrors or dental charts, teeth do tell stories of famine, childbirth, infection, or the tiny triumph of survival. Archaeologists centuries later will sift through graves and marvel at the grooves and stains left behind by daily bread. A mainstream historical fact here: the coarse, unrefined flour of medieval Europe contained enough residual stone dust to visibly wear down enamel in adults by middle age, a phenomenon so consistent that it's now used to date skeletons. But in your world you don't know that. You just know that your teeth hurt when it rains. You visit the local fair once a year, and that's where the real entertainment happens. Not jugglers, not jesters, but tooth pullers. They set up a stool right next to the pig sellers, waving their iron pliers like holy relics. One man boasts that he can pull a tooth in less time than it takes to blink. He's lying, of course. You've seen the victims. They scream, faint, or clutch the relic of their suffering like a trophy afterward. The crowd cheers. Someone faints again, and you can't decide which is worse, the pain or the smell. It's part theater, part medicine, and mostly luck. Sometimes a tooth puller hits the root wrong, breaking it in half. Infection sets in. You might die, or you might live without that side of your face ever looking right again. It's not exactly a win-win situation. You chew carefully for weeks after that. Half out of fear, half out of superstition. Your neighbor tells you about a charm, a small bone wrapped in linen, buried near the threshold, to keep toothworms from nesting in your gums. You laugh, but again, cautiously. The idea of tiny worms causing pain seems ridiculous, yet oddly comforting. At least it means something can be blamed. One quirky tidbit survives from real history. Many medieval texts describe toothache as the work of small worms that gnaw at nerves, often depicted in manuscript drawings as tiny serpents emerging from teeth. The cure: loud prayers, loud noises, or holding a candle near the tooth to smoke them out. Yes, it's absurd, but in your century, it's medicine. Your mother insists on herbal rinses instead. Sage leaves boiled in wine, mint crushed with salt, sometimes even vinegar if you've been bad. The results are questionable. You swish and spit, and for a brief moment your mouth tastes like the world's worst salad dressing. There's a faint freshness afterward, though, enough to trick you into thinking you've won. But then comes the morning bread again, and the wheel turns anew. You watch your reflection that night, candlelight rippling across your teeth, and wonder whether kings and queens ever worry about such things. Surely, you think, they have someone to clean their mouths for them. Yet the irony of history, one modern scholars still debate, is that nobles often had worse dental health than peasants. Refined flour, sugar imports and soft foods meant less grit but more rot. Some archaeologists argue that peasant diets, despite the stone dust, kept cavities at bay because there was little sugar to feed bacteria. Others claim the abrasiveness of daily bread simply masked decay by grinding away evidence. The debate continues centuries later, though you, chewing your salted crust, would likely find it a strange thing to argue about. By evening, you return home to a single-room cottage that smells faintly of straw and smoke. A cat curls near the hearth, indifferent to your human concerns. You stretch out on a straw mattress and think about the fair, the tooth puller, the miller, and your aching jaw. There's a strange serenity in it all. Pain is part of life, like hunger or rain. You close your eyes and feel your pulse in your gums, steady and stubborn. Tomorrow you'll chew again, laugh again, maybe lose another tooth someday, but for now the fire crackles softly and the world holds still. You dream of a time when bread won't break you and smiles won't cost so much to keep. The candle sputters, a drop of wax falls. Somewhere beyond the dark, the wheel of the mill turns once more, slow and eternal, grinding grain and your future enamel into dust. You wake to the sound of iron, that steady rhythmic clanging that seems to shape both tools and destiny. The village blacksmith is already at work, but this morning he's not making horseshoes. He's mending a pair of iron pliers used by the local tooth puller, or as people call him with unnerving respect, the toothsmith. You step outside into the crisp morning air, the kind that smells faintly of wet earth and last night's fire, and watch him hammer away with the focus of a man who understands that every blow might mean the difference between agony and relief. The toothsmith doesn't have an office. He travels with his bag of tools, part barber, part surgeon, part performer, and fully terrifying. You remember the last time he visited your village. A man named Bertram had been clutching his cheek for 3 days, muttering prayers between groans. By the time the toothsmith arrived, half the village had gathered just to see how much blood would fly this time. It's hard to tell whether they came to comfort him or to take notes for their own future misery. The toothsmith's setup is simple: a wooden stool, a leather strap, and a cup of wine that's less about sterilization and more about courage. He always starts with a story, something light to distract you, a reminder that pain is temporary, but gossip lasts forever. He calls his pliers the angel's wings, though anyone who's ever seen them in action might argue the name doesn't fit. When he leans over his patient, you can hear the whisper of his breath, the faint crack of a joint, the muted prayer under his breath, in nomine sancte Apollonia. Then comes the twist. A cry, a drop of blood. The toothsmith wipes his brow like a man finishing a painting. You imagine being the one on that stool, staring into his eyes as he works, eyes that look kind but tired, like someone who's seen too many mouths scream back at him. There's a kind of art to what he does, even if no one wants to admit it. He can tell the difference between a loose molar and a doomed one, just by touch. He knows which angle to twist, how long to hold, when to stop before the jaw cracks. It's gruesome, yes, but it's also skill. One mainstream historical fact makes this scene more vivid. Barber-surgeons in medieval Europe, and many towns required them to keep a sign of the teeth, a painted board, or an actual jawbone outside their shops to advertise their expertise. You can imagine that grim decoration swinging gently in the wind, like an omen and an invitation in one. You follow the toothsmith after his work to the small tavern, where he washes his hands with vinegar and ash, then downs a pint like a man cleansing his soul. You sit beside him, ask how he learned his trade, and he laughs loudly, roughly. "From my father," he says, "and he from his. Teeth have been our family's curse for 3 generations. He tells you that his tools once belonged to a blacksmith, that every hammer blow carries memory. There's poetry in that, though perhaps not the kind you'd want near your mouth. He offers to show you his bag of instruments, iron hooks, tiny chisels, tongs with curved tips for better grip. You can't help but stare. They look less like medical tools and more like something from a torture chamber, and maybe in a way they are, but to him they're beautiful. Each one saves a life," he says, his voice almost tender, or at least it ends a kind of suffering. Later that afternoon, a young woman arrives at the tavern, holding her face in both hands. You see the swelling from across the room, a bulge under her jaw, red and angry. The toothsmith sighs. "Another one," he mutters. He prepares his stool again, this time outside, under the old elm tree where everyone can watch. There's a strange carnival energy to it. Children giggling nervously, old men shaking their heads, women whispering prayers. You're torn between pity and fascination. The woman takes a deep breath, sits down and grips the wooden armrest until her knuckles pale. The toothsmith tilts her chin, murmurs something about angels again, and begins. The sound is not what you expect. It's not a scream, at least not at first. It's a gasp, a wet, clicking pop, then silence. He holds up a tooth between the iron tips of his pliers. The crowd cheers. Somewhere a dog barks as if applauding. You can't decide if this is medicine or theater, but either way it works. The woman spits blood into the dirt, wipes her face, and thanks him. Then she hands over a loaf of bread and a copper coin, his fee. That night, you find yourself thinking about pain and spectacle. How strange, you muse, that something so intimate, your own mouth, can become public entertainment. The toothsmith sleeps soundly, snoring like a man who's made peace with noise. You envy him. You roll over and press your fingers against your jaw, feeling the faint throb that always seems to return when you remember too vividly. Somewhere deep down, you know you're next. There's no escape in this world. Toothache comes for everyone, rich or poor, pious or sinful. Some say it's punishment for vanity, others for gluttony, but mostly it's just bad luck. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind as you drift. Some medieval practitioners believed that rubbing your gums with crushed emeralds could stop pain, though only if you were pure of heart. You can't help but laugh softly in the dark. Pure of heart in this world. You'd be better off chewing on the emerald itself and hoping for a distraction. Still, you imagine the glitter of a gemstone pressed against your lip, the absurd beauty of it all, and you almost understand why people believed. After all, in a world with so little certainty, hope is medicine too. In the flicker of your candlelight, you picture the toothsmith's hammer again, the same one that shapes horseshoes, swords, and salvation. There's something profoundly medieval about that overlap, about the way every craft bleeds into another. The same hands that forge steel for war also mend the fragile bones of human suffering. You realize that the toothsmith is less a healer and more a reminder of endurance, the human tendency to patch what's broken with whatever tools are available. You smile at the thought, though you quickly regret it when your jaw tightens in protest. The next morning, the toothsmith packs his bag and moves on. He's headed toward the next town, where someone else's pain is waiting. The villagers wave, half grateful, half relieved to see him go. You watch him disappear down the road, the early light catching the iron tips of his tools like tiny suns. For a moment, the world feels oddly quiet. You imagine him walking forever, a pilgrim of pain, his footsteps echoing across centuries. Long after he's gone, his hammer will keep ringing in your dreams, like the sound of hope disguised as hurt. And when your own tooth finally gives out, when the ache spreads through your jaw like wildfire, you'll remember his calm voice and his steady hands, and the faint metallic promise that maybe, just maybe, pain can be shaped into peace. You wake with a taste that doesn't belong in a peasant's mouth. Sweetness. It lingers faintly on your tongue. A relic from last night's fair where a merchant from the south sold something called white gold. Not silver, not salt. Sugar. A miracle, he called it. You had dipped a crust of bread in it, and for a moment the world seemed divine. Then as dawn breaks over your thatched roof, your tooth begins to hum like a tiny, angry bee. You press your tongue against it, and feel a twinge sharp enough to make your eyes water. Congratulations, you've just joined the most exclusive club of the Middle Ages, the ones rich or foolish enough to ruin their teeth with sweetness. In your century, sugar is a luxury that travels farther than most people ever will. It rides in sacks across deserts, over seas and into royal kitchens, where it's measured like jewels and hoarded like secrets. You might think of it as harmless. After all, honey has always been around, but this new white sweetness is different. Honey belongs to the fields. Sugar belongs to power. You wander down to the market square, where the merchants shout about silk, spices, and dates. The sugar seller stands apart, his table piled with tiny white cones wrapped in cloth, each one worth a week's wage. He talks about the Crusaders, about how they found this treasure in the East and brought it home to impress their kings. You can almost picture them, sunburned, dusty knights, gnawing on candied almonds between battles, polishing their armor with one hand and their cavities with the other. You taste another pinch, and your aching molar throbs in protest. One mainstream historical fact makes it all too real. Sugar entered Europe in earnest through Crusader trade routes in the 11th and 12th centuries, first as medicine, then as confection, and finally as obsession. Doctors recommended it to balance humors and strengthen the heart. You almost laugh, imagining some medieval physician spooning sweetness into a patient while the patient's teeth quietly surrender. As you walk, the smell of roasting meat and spiced wine fills the air. Your teeth ache just thinking about it. You pass a baker kneading dough, his flour-dusted hands moving with rhythm and resignation. His bread, you realize, has never known sugar. It's all grit and grain, the old way. But next to him, a noble servant buys honey cakes, sprinkled with imported sweetness, something only the rich can afford. You watch as the servant bites in, smiling with pride, and you wonder how long that smile will last. A few decades, maybe less. You think of your own mouth, your uneven teeth, your aching molar, and feel an odd mixture of envy and pity. It's strange how luxury can hurt so beautifully. You meet a monk that evening, one who studies herbal medicine. He tells you that sugar isn't new, only rediscovered. The Romans knew it, he says. They called it Indian salt. He stirs a pot of syrup made from herbs and honey, claiming it cures sore throats. You tell him your tooth hurts. He nods solemnly, dips a cloth in his potion, and presses it to your cheek. It burns like holy fire. Pain, he says, means it's working. You nod, because disagreeing with a man in robes never ends well. Later, when you're alone, you spit into the fire and swear softly under your breath, tasting sweetness and salt at once. That night, as you lie half awake, your mind drifts to palaces far away, places where the air smells like cinnamon and the tables are lined with gold. You imagine queens dipping candied fruit into wine, nobles showing off gleaming smiles that hide decay beneath. A quirky tidbit of history whispers through your thoughts. Queen Elizabeth I of England, centuries from your lifetime, will be so fond of sugar that her teeth will turn black, and courtiers will copy her out of fashion, darkening their own smiles to look royal. You smile in the dark, amused by the thought that vanity ages just as fast as enamel. Somewhere deep down, you realize the pattern. What people can't have, they idolize. What they finally get, they destroy themselves with. In your dreams, you find yourself walking through a medieval kitchen, the grand kind, built for kings. You smell sugar melting in copper pans, see cooks pouring it into molds shaped like castles and saints. The sweetness hardens into sculptures, so delicate they might as well be prayer. Children of nobles watch wide-eyed, reaching for a taste, while servants hover nearby, already dreading the toothaches that will follow. You reach out, touch one of the sugar towers, and it collapses instantly into dust. When you wake, your tongue still tastes of it. Beautiful, fleeting, and sharp as regret. The next morning, you visit the toothsmith again. He listens to your complaint, prods your aching tooth with the care of a man testing rotten wood, and sighs, "Sweetness," he mutters, "a fine way to rot the soul and the mouth together." He offers to pull it, but you hesitate. Not yet. Not for something so small. You'd rather endure the ache than the sound of that iron tool. He shrugs, dips a cloth in strong wine, and tells you to bite down. The pain dulls, but only just. You can still feel the heartbeat of the ache, steady and stubborn, like the tolling of a bell somewhere inside your skull. Days pass. You chew on one side of your mouth, avoid laughter, and pretend everything's fine. When you help your neighbor bake, you sneak another lick of honey. It's worth it. Sweetness is a tiny rebellion, a reminder that even in a life ruled by survival, pleasure exists. You think of monks writing in candlelight, their teeth darkening as they sip sweetened wine, copying the words of long-dead scholars who never knew the ache of molars melting from luxury. You remember how the Crusaders brought home sugar, calling it medicine, and in a strange way they weren't wrong. It cures something, the dull ache of monotony, the hunger for joy. It's not good medicine, but it's human. An open scholarly debate lingers at the edge of your thoughts. Historians still argue whether the medieval sweet tooth spread faster through trade or religion, through merchants' greed or monks' recipes. You picture a monk's ink-stained hand dipping a quill in sugar water to soften parchment, and think maybe it doesn't matter. Sweetness, like sin, finds its own way into every mouth. That night, you sit by the fire, running your tongue along the rim of your aching tooth. The warmth makes it worse somehow, throbbing in rhythm with your heartbeat. You take a sip of ale to numb it, then another for courage. The stars outside glitter like sugar crystals on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell tolls for evening prayers. You whisper one of your own, not to any saint in particular, just to the simple hope that tomorrow's bread will be soft, the ache will fade, and maybe, just maybe, sweetness won't always hurt this much. The fire crackles, the ache settles, and you drift off, dreaming of honey that never turns to pain. Morning comes with that familiar dull throb behind your jaw, the kind that makes chewing feel like punishment for living. You sit up in bed, staring at the beam of light cutting through the smoke-stained air, and wonder if this is what sainthood feels like. Constant endurance with a faint smell of goats in the background. Today you've decided to try what everyone swears by, herbal remedies. Not the fancy imported ones sold in noble courts, but the kind passed down from your grandmother's grandmother, half healing, half superstition. You wrap a cloth around your head like everyone does when pain strikes, because apparently compression keeps the evil spirits from sneaking in through your ears. Then you step outside into the chilly morning and head to the edge of the fields, where the air smells of wet grass, garlic, and possibility. Herbs are the medieval answer to everything. Sore throat? Mint? Bellyache? Fennel. Love spell gone wrong? Probably sage again. But for teeth? Ah, that's where things get creative. You start with garlic, because every healer insists it purifies the body and drives away not just illness, but envy and demons. You crush a few cloves under a stone, mix them with vinegar, and swish. The result is an experience no poet would dare describe. It burns, it stings, and it smells like you've just insulted every vampire in a 10-mile radius. You rinse, spit, and look hopeful for about 10 seconds before realizing your tooth still hurts. Worse, now your breath could melt the iron off a knight's helmet. Still, hope is stubborn. You try sage next, boiling it in wine just as the village healer taught you. She says it soothes the gums and draws out corruption. The steam rises from the pot in slow curls, filling your cottage with a scent that's half forest, half funeral. You dip a scrap of linen in the brew and press it against your cheek. It's warm, comforting even. For a moment you think it's working, but then the warmth turns to heat, and you wonder whether you're soothing your gums or slowly cooking them. You pull the cloth away and laugh softly, because at this point, laughter hurts less than chewing. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Medieval dental care genuinely did rely on such mixtures. Texts like leech books and taquenum sanitatis recommended rinses made from wine, vinegar, salt, sage, and sometimes even ground pepper to drive worms from the teeth. You picture a monk carefully recording these recipes with quill and ink, completely unaware that 1,000 years later, people will read them and whisper, "Goat's urine, really?" Yet there it is, written in Latin, as if sacred scripture itself approved the method. And so inevitably you try it too. The shepherds tell you it works best if the goat is female and milk-giving, though no one can explain why. You fetch a small bowl, approach the goats with a seriousness that would make a priest proud, and somehow manage to gather your remedy. You mix it with ashes, because apparently cleanliness is optional, but symbolism is everything. The moment you bring it near your face, you begin questioning your life choices, your lineage, and possibly the entire existence of civilization. You dab a bit on the swollen gum, praying quietly that this is the cure, and not the cause of your next illness. The pain doesn't vanish, but your mind certainly leaves your body for a moment, probably in protest. When you tell the healer later, she nods approvingly. If it hurts, she says, it means the bad spirits are leaving. You think about telling her the only spirit leaving is your will to live, but you keep quiet. People trust her, and maybe they should. She's seen things. She once stitched a soldier's jaw with horsehair and called it divine intervention. Her hut smells like sage and smoke, lined with jars of roots and dried petals. In the corner, a candle burns beside a wooden carving of Saint Apollonia, patron saint of toothache sufferers. The healer tells you to leave a coin there, to ask for mercy. You do. Anything's worth trying when you've been chewing on one side for weeks. You sit outside her hut afterward, watching bees float lazily over the thyme bushes. There's something peaceful about the rhythm of old cures, even when they don't work. You chew a sprig of mint, mostly to recover from the goat incident, and think about how strange it is that nature can be both friend and trickster. You remember once hearing a nobleman boast that his dentist, yes, they exist for the wealthy, used powdered coral mixed with honey as a mouth cleanser. The idea sounds absurd, yet elegant. Coral, honey, goat urine. Your century never lacks imagination, only accuracy. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces from memory. In some medieval towns, people cleaned their teeth with burnt breadcrumbs mixed with salt and honey, believing the contrast of sweet and bitter balanced bodily humors. You try it once, mostly out of curiosity. The result is crunchy. You spend 10 minutes afterward wondering if you've invented medieval granola or an early form of punishment. Either way, your mouth feels smoother, and that's something. As the day stretches on, you find yourself thinking about smell. How every cure seems to make you smell either like a garden or a battlefield. You imagine medieval markets, thick with aromas of garlic, vinegar, and herbs, blending into a perfume that could knock over a horse. People probably didn't notice, though. When everything smells like life itself, sweat, bread, smoke, soil, you stop judging. Besides, breath fresheners aren't entirely absent from your world. You've seen nobles chew on cloves or aniseed after feasts. Some even rinse with rosewater, though that's mostly to show off that they can afford roses, not to actually fix anything. You sit by the fire that night, gnawing gently on a piece of salted meat and feeling your tooth pulse in time with your heartbeat. You think about how strange it is to live in a time where pain is so public. Everyone knows when you're suffering. Everyone has advice. You wonder if pain would feel lonelier in a quieter age, one where people hide it behind polite smiles and mint-flavored lies. In your world, pain smells like vinegar and sounds like laughter because someone always has a worse story to tell. The healer passes by your door later, her shadow stretching long in the firelight. She carries a bundle of fresh herbs and hums softly, a tune that feels older than memory. Remember, she says, pausing at your threshold, the mouth is a doorway. Keep it clean and your soul stays whole. You nod, though you're not entirely sure whether she's speaking metaphorically or just avoiding another goat experiment. Still, you like the thought that somewhere between chewing, praying, and spitting out herbal sludge, you might actually be preserving something sacred. An open scholarly debate hums in the background of your weary mind. Were medieval herbalists genuinely effective, or just well-intentioned storytellers with mortar and pestle? Some modern scholars argue that the antibacterial properties of sage, vinegar, and salt gave real relief. Others insist most cures were placebo wrapped in poetry. You, sitting in the dark with garlic breath and a slightly less angry gum, think maybe both are true. Belief itself has a taste. It lingers on the tongue, half faith, half failure. The night deepens, and the fire settles into glowing embers. You breathe through your mouth, not because of reverence, but because your nose can't handle the garlic fumes anymore. The pain has dulled to a whisper. Maybe it's the sage, maybe it's exhaustion, or maybe it's mercy. You close your eyes and drift into sleep, your dreams scented with herbs and rain. In them, Saint Apollonia smiles faintly, holding a sprig of mint in one hand and a hammer in the other. You laugh softly in your sleep, knowing that somewhere in history someone will read about goat's urine and call it absurd. But tonight, in this smoky room, it feels almost like hope. The monastery bell tolls before dawn, its slow, hollow song rolling across the valley like a sigh from heaven. You wake to it and pull your cloak tighter, the chill of the stone floor biting through the soles of your feet. The air smells of ink and incense, two things that seem harmless until you've lived long enough to know that even holiness carries a taste. Today you've come to seek help not from a healer or a toothsmith, but from a monk. Not just any monk, Brother Alaric, the keeper of remedies and secrets. His cell is tucked near the infirmary, where the walls are lined with jars labeled in Latin, salvia, mel, acetum, spiritus sanctus, and, inexplicably, ashes of a blessed candle. The door is open. Inside, the only sound is scratching, quill on parchment, ink whispering over words meant to save bodies and souls alike. Brother Alaric looks up when you enter. His eyes are pale, almost translucent, as if years of candlelight have burned the color from them. "Toothache," he says before you speak. You nod. Everyone who comes here nods. He gestures for you to sit and continues writing for a moment, finishing a sentence with careful flourish before blotting the ink. "Pain," he murmurs, "is a reminder of sin's persistence, but so is laughter. Both must be treated with humility." You're not sure if he means to comfort you or distract you, but you nod anyway. On the table beside him lies a manuscript open to a page illuminated with red ink drawings, tiny teeth, each labeled, each connected to the organs of the body. "This," he says, tracing one with his finger, "is the wisdom of the ancients. Every tooth speaks to a part of the soul. Lose one, and something inside you falters. The upper teeth, those are divine, the lowers, earthly. You peer at the diagram, which looks suspiciously like something a very determined child might have drawn. Still, the care in his voice makes you almost believe it. A mainstream historical fact lingers here. Monastic infirmaries in medieval Europe often preserved and copied medical texts from Greek and Arabic sources, including early dental diagrams linking teeth to humoral balance. Scholars later found them tucked between psalms, as if God and gum disease shared the same page. Brother Alaric stands and begins preparing a rinse. He mixes wine, crushed myrrh, and salt, stirring with a wooden spoon that's seen better centuries. "Hold this in your mouth," he instructs, handing you the cup. "Don't swallow. Pray while you wait." You obey. The liquid burns, but not as badly as the silence. The room feels suspended in time, candles dripping wax like slow rain, the quill still quivering from his last note, the faint rustle of pages turning in the adjoining scriptorium. You try to focus on the prayer he's muttering under his breath, but it's difficult when your mouth feels like it's auditioning for sainthood through fire. After a minute, he nods for you to spit into the bowl. The pain has dulled, or maybe your tongue is too numb to tell the difference. He smiles faintly. "Better." You nod again. He seems pleased, which is dangerous, because pleased monks often get experimental. He rummages through his shelves and produces a small piece of parchment. "A charm," he says, "copied from an older text." He hands it to you. The Latin words shimmer in red ink. "Christus vincit, vermis cadit." Christ conquers, the worm falls. You remember hearing about the toothworm myth before the belief that little creatures lived in your teeth, feeding on your pain. Brother Alaric takes it seriously. "If you place this under your pillow," he explains, "the worm will crawl out, frightened by holiness." You suppress a smile. You've met that worm, it's called sugar. As you leave, you pass through the main hall, where other monks bend over manuscripts, their lips moving silently as they copy words line by line. You notice how many of them chew sprigs of herbs as they work. "To keep focus," one whispers, though the smell of sage and wine in the air suggests a different motive. Monks, you realize, suffer the same afflictions as everyone else. Their teeth ache, their gums bleed, and they hide the pain behind hymns. You imagine the irony of it. Men who can recite entire psalms from memory but wince at the thought of biting into bread. A quirky historical tidbit fits perfectly here. Archaeological studies of monastic cemeteries show that monks often had worse teeth than peasants. Their diet, rich in honeyed wine, soft bread, and dried fruit, was less abrasive but far more cavity-inducing. They prayed for purity but feasted like scribes of sweetness. You think of Brother Alaric dipping his quill in honey to keep it supple and wonder how often he licked it clean, sweetening both his ink and his downfall. Later that evening, you return to the chapel for vespers. The chanting rolls through the hall, deep and slow, a sound that vibrates in your chest. You feel your tooth again, not sharp pain, just pressure, like something ancient tapping politely from within. You try to focus on the words, Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto. You mouth the syllables carefully, aware of every click of enamel, every whisper of your tongue against cracked molars. For a brief moment, the rhythm of the chant almost aligns with the pulse in your jaw. Pain becomes prayer. It's absurd and holy all at once. After the service, Brother Alaric finds you again. He holds up a small vial of oil infused with cloves. "A gift," he says softly. "Apply sparingly. The Lord gives us nature as teacher." You thank him, though you can't help noticing the mischievous glint in his eye, the same one all healers have when they're not entirely sure their remedy works. You take the vial home. dab a drop on your aching tooth, and nearly leap out of your skin. It burns fiercely, then fades, leaving behind a warmth that feels almost luxurious. You taste the spice, think of distant ships carrying it across oceans, and marvel that something so small could travel so far just to make you curse and sigh in equal measure. As you settle into bed, you think about the monks, their ink-stained fingers, their silent patience, their belief that everything painful is somehow purifying. You picture them under candlelight, copying words about love, sin, and worms, their own teeth quietly surrendering to the same rot they're trying to cure. There's a comfort in that, strange as it sounds. Maybe the point isn't to heal completely. Maybe the point is to endure beautifully. An open scholarly debate lingers around your drifting thoughts. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine was practical science or spiritual ritual. Were monks true physicians or simply scribes preserving fragments of forgotten wisdom? You, half asleep, decide it doesn't matter. When a prayer and a clove oil vial both manage to dull the pain, theology and chemistry become indistinguishable. The last candle flickers low. Your jaw relaxes. Your breath slows. Outside, the wind moves through the monastery courtyard, rattling the ivy against the stone like whispered secrets. You imagine Brother Alaric still awake, copying words by candlelight, the same words that will survive centuries to tell others how to soothe a toothache with wine, salt, and faith. You smile, careful not to disturb the fragile peace in your mouth, and let the world fade into darkness, half herb, half hymn. The first thing you notice at the midsummer fair is how differently people smile, or rather who dares to. The peasants grin wide, their laughter carrying across the fields like crows in flight, gaps between teeth catching sunlight like small victories. The nobles, though, barely part their lips, as if joy itself might betray them. You can tell everything about class by how someone opens their mouth. For peasants, teeth are tools, brown, chipped, sometimes missing, but honest. For nobles, they're ornaments meant to stay hidden unless carefully polished with honeyed powders or disguised by scented breath. You weave through the crowd, watching a farmer bite into an apple without fear, while a silk-robed merchant cuts his pear into tiny pieces, chewing as delicately as if his jaw might break. It's the medieval version of class distinction, your enamel as a status symbol. The irony, of course, is that the poor might actually have the stronger teeth. The bread they eat is rough, the flour unrefined, and sugar is something they've only heard nobles brag about. You tear into a loaf yourself, dense, chewy, full of grit from the millstones, and taste both survival and sand. The nobles, meanwhile, nibble soft white rolls made from fine flour that's been sifted so many times it's practically silk. It looks beautiful, but beauty here has consequences. A mainstream historical fact confirms what your aching jaw already suspects. Studies of medieval skeletons show that peasants, though malnourished, often had fewer cavities than the rich. Their teeth were worn down by stone grit. Yes, but free from the rot of sugar and imported indulgence. The wealthy, with their delicate pastries and candied fruits, paid a literal price for luxury, each feast leaving behind quiet decay. You pass a young nobleman near the jousting ring, smiling at a lady through what can only be described as the world's most cautious grin. His teeth glint faintly, not from cleanliness but from the thin film of wine and spice residue that never quite leaves. He dabs his lips with a silk cloth after every sip as if afraid the world might stain him. The lady returns a smile so rehearsed it might as well be painted. You catch yourself wondering whether her lips are hiding beauty or disaster. Rumor says one of the queen's attendants has a mouthful of gold, actual gold wires binding her front teeth together in a kind of primitive dentistry. The idea sounds painful, but also regal. You imagine the weight of it, how heavy a smile must feel when it costs that much. Back among your own kind, the peasants are chewing roasted barley cakes and laughing loud enough to wake the saints. One man with 3 teeth left in his entire head claims he can still bite through leather, and no one doubts him. You sit beside them, warmed by fire and wine, and realize that imperfection has its own kind of charm. You show your chipped tooth, and someone calls it a sign of work, which in your world is the highest compliment there is. Maybe that's the secret. When life is short and filled with labor, you smile because you're still alive, not because your mouth is perfect. Later, you wander to the merchant stalls where women sell powders and charms for beauty. A jar labeled Dentibus albus, white teeth, catches your eye. The merchant claims it's made from ground bone, salt, and rosewater. She demonstrates by rubbing a bit on her own teeth, smiling like an advertisement centuries before the concept exists. You try it. The taste is awful, chalky, metallic, but it leaves your teeth feeling smoother, and that's enough to convince you for a moment that maybe you could pass for noble. A quirky historical tidbit flickers to mind. Medieval women of high rank sometimes used mixtures of burnt alum, coral dust, or crushed pearls to whiten their teeth, not realizing that such abrasives stripped enamel faster than time itself. You can't help but laugh softly. Everyone's polishing themselves into ruin. You pause near a makeshift stage where a wandering minstrel sings a song about a lord who lost his teeth in a duel, not from a blow, but from laughing too hard at his own joke. The crowd howls. Humor, like decay, is democratic. It spares no class. Even the local priest smiles at the punchline, though he covers his mouth out of habit. It's considered polite, after all, to hide one's laughter if one's teeth are missing, or worse, blackened. You watch the faces around you, the young with wide, fearless grins, the old with toothless gums still curling in mirth, and somewhere in between, you clutching your cheek occasionally, smiling through pain because that's what life here demands. When dusk falls, the nobles withdraw to their pavilions for the evening feast. You sneak a glance through the flap of a tent and see platters of candied almonds, preserved figs, and pies glazed with syrup so thick it gleams like glass. Every bite looks divine. Every bite is disaster. You imagine the next morning, the noblemen pressing their jaws, the noble women whispering to their attendants about pain behind their smiles. For a brief wicked moment, you're grateful for your rough bread and your simpler suffering. Later that week, you visit the blacksmith's wife, who's rumored to have the brightest smile in 3 villages. She tells you her secret: chew sage and rub ashes on your teeth every morning. You do, and for a fleeting second, you almost believe you look younger, though the mirror insists otherwise. She laughs when you mention nobles and their honeyed breath. They hide their rot under perfume, she says, but rot smells the same, rich or poor. You like her philosophy. It feels truer than anything written in a monastery book. As the harvest months roll on, the class divide becomes more than just visible, it's audible. The peasants' laughter still rings out in fields and taverns, but in the manor, conversations are quieter, constrained, polite, smiles are rationed like sugar. You realize that even joy has a hierarchy here. The poor laugh from the belly, the rich from the throat. You'd rather keep your peasant's grin, cracked tooth and all. An open scholarly debate drifts through your thoughts as you lie under the stars that night. Historians still argue whether social class in the Middle Ages truly dictated dental health or merely reflected access to indulgence. Some claim nobles decayed faster. Others suggest they had better means to hide the evidence through early forms of dentistry. But you, lying on a bed of straw with your mouth tasting faintly of sage and soot, think the truth is simpler. Everyone pays, one way or another. The poor lose their teeth to grindstone and grit. The rich lose theirs to sweetness and vanity. The only real difference is who can afford to pretend it doesn't hurt. You close your eyes and smile into the dark, feeling the roughness of your teeth against your tongue, like the edges of memory. Somewhere in a distant manor, a noblewoman swirls clove wine in her mouth to dull the same ache you feel. Somewhere else, a monk prays for deliverance from decay. You think of them all, peasants, nobles, scribes, and realize you're united by pain if nothing else. The fair is over, the fire's dim, but the echo of laughter lingers, rough and real. You fall asleep smiling, flawed, human, and utterly medieval. You wake before sunrise to the sound of something tiny gnawing. Not in the rafters, not in the walls, but deep inside your own jaw. That's what it feels like anyway, a slow, secret chewing just beneath the skin, as though a small creature has made a home in your molar and is busy redecorating. You press your palm to your cheek and whisper the word everyone uses when this kind of pain begins. Worm. Not metaphor, not insult, literal worm. The tooth worm. You've heard stories of it since childhood, from grandmothers and priests alike. The old wives say it curls up in the hollow of a tooth, whispering hunger into the nerves, until you feed it with warm bread or drown it with wine. The learned men meanwhile write about it in earnest, their manuscripts full of drawings that look suspiciously like tiny snakes or coiled threads of fate. Either way, it's alive in the minds of your people, and right now, in the throbbing corner of your mouth, you're not sure it isn't alive in you too. You stumble to the basin and look at yourself in the dim morning light. The left side of your face is swollen, pale around the edges of the pain. You open your mouth and peer in, half expecting to see movement. Nothing, just darkness, shadow, and a faint taste of copper. Still, the stories come rushing back. The ones about how worms crawl into your mouth at night if you sleep with it open, how they hide in spoiled milk or cling to the dampness of barley gruel. Your neighbor once swore he'd seen one pulled from his cousin's mouth, wriggling like a thread of candle smoke. You didn't believe him then. You almost do now. You dress slowly, wrapping a scarf around your jaw to keep the cold from feeding the worm. The village healer told you once that warmth makes it sleepy, cold makes it hungry. You're not sure if that's true, but at this point, logic is a luxury you can't afford. You shuffle down the lane to the healer's cottage, where bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, and a small fire smolders under an iron pot. The air smells of mint and damp wool. She greets you with a knowing smile. She's seen this expression before. "Ah," she says softly, "you've got a little guest." You don't bother denying it. She reaches for a box of tools, none of which look particularly inviting: a thin iron needle, a twist of linen, a small candle, and a bowl of honey. You ask what she plans to do, but she only hums, the way healers hum when they're hoping confidence sounds like magic. She explains as she works. The worm, she says, hates light and noise. That's why it hides deep in the tooth, coiled up where prayers can't reach. But smoke drives it out. She dips the candle in honey, lights it, and positions it near your open mouth. "Hold still," she whispers. "The worm will climb toward the sweetness and the heat." You hold still because you've run out of better ideas. The flame flickers inches from your lips, the honey beginning to bubble, the air thick with sweetness and fear. The pain builds until it feels like the worm is moving, slithering upward, desperate for escape. You squeeze your eyes shut. There's a pop, faint but real. The healer gasps, triumphant. "It's gone," she says. You're not sure if she means the worm or your will to live. You rinse your mouth with warm wine, swish and spit into the dirt. No worm appears, but the ache does ease a little. Maybe it worked. Maybe belief itself is a kind of medicine. One mainstream historical fact grounds your blurry faith. The toothworm theory dominated medical thought from Mesopotamia through the Middle Ages, appearing in texts from Assyrian tablets to European manuscripts. Even as physicians began dissecting corpses and debating humors, the worm persisted, a myth so convincing it outlived entire empires. You wonder if that's what pain does to people, turns reason into ritual, science into story. Later that day, you visit the church, because every affliction in your world eventually leads there. The priest listens as you confess that something unholy lives in your mouth. He nods gravely, as if you'd said you swallowed sin itself. He prescribes a prayer, naturally, and a rinse made of holy water and salt. He tells you to whisper your sins into the bowl before spitting, so the worm will hear them and flee in shame. You follow his instructions exactly, though you suspect the only thing ashamed here is your dignity. The salt burns, the holy water tastes faintly of tin, and still the ache hums quietly, stubborn as a sermon. That night, you can't sleep. Every creak of the house sounds like chewing. You picture the worm as the monks describe it in illuminated manuscripts, a tiny serpent with a smiling face, coiled like a ribbon, its tail wrapped around the root of a tooth like ivy on stone. You imagine it whispering little confessions of its own, tiny apologies for surviving on your pain. There's a strange intimacy to it. You start talking back, softly, just to make the night feel less long. You win. You murmur into the darkness, "Just stop chewing." The worm doesn't answer, of course. It just hums faintly, the same way your jaw does. You drift in and out of half-sleep, your dreams full of writhing shapes and candle smoke that smells faintly of honey. A quirky historical tidbit slips into that dream. Somewhere in medieval Norway, a poet once wrote a charm against toothache that began with the words, "A worm crept into a man's tooth." The poem instructs the sufferer to recite verses commanding the worm to leave, invoking the names of saints, angels, and even Thor for good measure. You imagine yourself standing in the snow, reciting a charm to both God and thunder, and find the image oddly comforting. Pain makes strange poets of us all. When you wake again, the pain is softer, like a distant memory. The scarf has slipped from your jaw. The candle burned out hours ago. You stretch and realize the worm, real or imagined, has finally quieted. Maybe it left. Maybe it died. Maybe you just got lucky. You step outside into the cool dawn, and for the first time in days, the world feels bearable. Birds sing, roosters crow, and the mill creaks in its endless rhythm. You smile carefully, testing your jaw, and feel only a dull echo. It's bliss. On your way back from the well, you pass a group of children playing in the mud. One little boy grins at you, showing a gap where 2 teeth used to be. "Lost them to the worm," he announces proudly, as if it were a badge of courage. The others laugh. You laugh too, but gently, because laughter still hurts a little. You realize the legend will never die. It's too human to vanish. The worm is just a story about helplessness, about needing something to blame when your body turns against you. And in a world without microscopes, it's easier to picture a creature than to admit that pain comes from within. An open scholarly debate drifts like a whisper through your thoughts as you walk home. Did the toothworm myth arise from real observation, perhaps the squirming of nerve fibers in decaying teeth, or was it purely symbolic, a metaphor for corruption and sin? Historians can't agree. You decide it doesn't matter. Every age invents its own worms. Some crawl through teeth, some through minds, and some through memories that won't stop aching. By nightfall, the pain is gone. You sit by the fire, chewing on soft bread, savoring the simple miracle of eating without fear. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and for a fleeting second, you think you hear that faint gnawing again. You smile, shake your head, and toss another log on the fire. "Stay gone," you whisper. The flames flare brighter, warm and alive, licking at the air like a candle chasing shadows. Somewhere deep in the embers, the ghost of a worm curls up and fades. And for the first time in a long time, you fall asleep smiling, your mouth quiet, your mind still, your faith unbitten. The great hall smells of roasted meat, beeswax, and wine, 3 scents that promise joy to everyone except you. You sit at the long wooden table surrounded by nobles, musicians, and servants, and all you can think about is the steady pulse behind your jaw. The feast has barely begun, and already you feel like you're chewing on regret. Candles drip down the length of the table, their golden light dancing across silver goblets and faces painted with mirth. Minstrels strum lutes at the far end of the hall, their songs swelling with laughter and applause. It's a picture of abundance, a portrait of power, and you, sitting there with your swollen cheek and nervous smile, are the hidden cost of it all. You look at the roasted swan in the center platter, its feathers replaced with gold leaf, and you can't help thinking that your molar would crumble just looking at it. You watch the lord of the manor, tear into a drumstick with all the grace of a bear. He laughs loudly, wine spilling down his chin, his teeth what remains of them dark from years of clove wine and neglect. Across from him, his lady hides her mouth behind a lace handkerchief every time she smiles. You wonder if that's modesty or necessity. A servant leans close to pour more wine, and you catch a whiff of vinegar from his breath. Another soul fighting the same endless battle. You reach for your goblet, take a careful sip and try to convince yourself that the warmth spreading through your body might numb the ache. It doesn't. It only sharpens the contrast between pleasure and pain. A platter of almonds glazed in sugar passes down the table, and you wince at the sight. You've learned your lesson from the last feast. Sweetness here is as dangerous as politics. The noble beside you nudges the dish toward you, grinning. "Eat, friend," he says. "They're good for the humors." You smile politely, murmuring something about already having eaten too much, which is a lie even your tooth believes. The man shrugs and pops 3 into his mouth, crunching loudly. You hear the faint crack of something that isn't almond. His grin falters. You pretend not to notice. There's a story told by one of the servants as the evening grows louder, a kind of grim entertainment meant for the ale-soaked. He swears that in the city, a noblewoman once fainted mid-feast because her toothworm began singing from the heat of her soup. The table bursts into laughter. You force a chuckle, but your hand is pressed against your cheek beneath the tablecloth. You feel the rhythm of your own pulse, steady, insistent. You think of Brother Alaric's advice, "Pain is prayer," and mutter under your breath, "Then I've prayed enough." A mainstream historical fact drifts through the haze of sound and smoke. Feasts in the late Middle Ages were brutal on teeth. The food, though luxurious, was often overly hard, spiced and sweetened. Peacock glazed with sugar, pies packed with almonds, candied fruits boiled in honey and vinegar. Historians later discovered that even wealthy banquet-goers frequently broke molars during meals, their smiles hiding decay beneath layers of pride and etiquette. You glance around the table and realize you're surrounded by evidence. Every laugh seems just a little too careful, every bite followed by a subtle wince. The whole hall is full of people pretending their jaws don't ache. The musicians switch to a livelier tune, and servants bring out trenchers piled with pastries filled with dates, figs, and nuts. A young page boy walks past you, his arms shaking under the weight of a golden platter. The smell is intoxicating. Honey, butter, roasted almonds, and for a reckless second you forget yourself. You bite into one. The pain is immediate, bright and sharp like lightning through bone. You keep your expression still, because at a noble's table, pain is poor manners. You chew slowly, forcing the smile, and swallow with effort. Someone asks if the pastries are good. You nod. They're delicious. They taste like regret and wealth. You excuse yourself after the 3rd course and step out into the corridor. The air is cooler here, filled with the faint scent of stone and torches. You lean against the wall, massaging your jaw. Your reflection flickers in the polished armor of a guard standing nearby. "Tooth?" he asks quietly. You blink, surprised. He taps his own cheek knowingly. Happens to us all. He reaches into his pouch and pulls out a small lump of beeswax. "Chew this," he says. "It warms the pain away." You take it, soften it between your fingers, and press it gently over the aching tooth. The relief is slight but real, a warm barrier between agony and endurance. You thank him, and he smiles, a genuine smile, full of gaps. "Better holes than lies," he says before turning back to his post. You wander back toward the hall, pausing near the open doors. Inside, laughter roars like fire. The nobles raise their cups for another toast. A troubadour sings about knights who fought dragons, though you suspect most here would be slain by a loaf of stale bread instead. You don't return to the table. Instead, you linger near the servants, where honesty still breathes. One of the kitchen girls offers you a piece of soft cheese. "It helps," she says, seeing the way you cradle your jaw. You take it. It's gentle, smooth, mercifully bland. You smile at her, and she grins back with crooked teeth. You're lucky, she adds. The rich don't know how to hurt quietly. As the night deepens, the feast transforms. The air thickens with smoke and laughter. Spilled wine stains the rushes underfoot. The noble beside you earlier, the almond enthusiast, is holding his jaw now, trying to hide it behind conversation. The lady with the lace handkerchief has abandoned all decorum, her mouth open in laughter that flashes gold fillings. You realize there's no hierarchy to suffering anymore. Pain has leveled the room. It's strangely comforting. You bite your tongue, quite literally, to stop yourself from smiling too widely. A quirky historical tidbit sneaks into your thoughts as you watch the chaos unfold. In some medieval banquets, when guests broke teeth or felt sudden pain, servants were trained to bring small clove-studded apples to mask the ache and breath alike. You imagine a line of servants rushing through this hall, trays of clove apples in hand like tiny fragrant bandages for pride. You half wish one would appear for you. Instead, a jester dances past, bells jingling, his grin wide and gap-toothed. "Smile, good sir," he says, "for the worms can't chew what you never show." You laugh despite yourself, nearly spitting the wine you shouldn't have drunk. As the final course arrives, a monstrous pie filled with live birds that explode into flight when the crust is cut. You marvel at how everything here is designed for spectacle, not comfort. You think of peasants gnawing on coarse bread and realize they'd never survive this feast. But then again, maybe that's the point. The nobles don't eat to live, they eat to prove they can. You, standing on the edge between hunger and agony, feel like you've discovered the secret truth of the medieval mouth. Every bite of pleasure hides a price. When the hall finally quiets, the candles burning low, you slip away into the courtyard. The air outside is mercifully cold. You can hear the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of servants cleaning up inside. You sit on the stone steps, take the beeswax from your mouth, and smile into the dark. The pain has dulled to something almost bearable. Maybe it's the night air. Maybe it's the wine. Maybe it's resignation. You think about the guard's words, "Better holes than lies," and decide he was right. You'd rather have a broken tooth than a broken truth. An open scholarly debate hums through your mind like a quiet refrain. Historians still argue whether medieval banquets truly reflected opulence or desperation, a need to display power through excess, even at the expense of comfort and health. You chew on that thought the way you chew on everything these days. Slowly, carefully, painfully aware. The moon rises high above the manor, pale and watchful. You tilt your head back and breathe through your mouth, feeling the chill settle deep in your throat. Somewhere in that cold, a strange gratitude stirs. You've survived another feast, another lesson in how beauty devours itself. You touch your aching cheek, sigh and whisper to the night, "Better luck next meal." The wind answers softly, carrying away the smell of roasted meat and laughter until only silence remains, cool and clean against your face. The first time you fall in love, you don't notice her eyes or her hair. You notice her breath. It's sweet, or at least it tries to be. She's standing in the corner of the market square, selling ribbons, and when she laughs, the air smells faintly of cloves and wine. You take that as a sign from heaven until she speaks again, and the illusion breaks. There it is, the unmistakable tang of vinegar and honey, the medieval perfume of effort. You smile anyway, because you're smitten, and in your century, affection is an act of bravery. Nobody smells good. Everybody's just trying not to smell worse. The poets may write about rosy lips and pearly teeth, but the truth is simpler. Love in the Middle Ages requires a strong stomach and selective breathing. You stroll beside her, pretending to admire the ribbons when you're really counting the seconds between her words to steal small, clean breaths. She tells you about her mother's recipe for mouthwash. Mint soaked in wine with a pinch of ground fennel, and you nod as if she's reciting scripture. You try it later that night, of course. The result is vivid. It burns, but it leaves your mouth feeling momentarily blessed. You decide to keep using it. Love, you've learned, makes people endure strange torments. You start chewing fennel seeds in secret, rolling them across your tongue before you see her again. It works, sort of. The sweetness lasts long enough for a smile, not long enough for a kiss. At the next village festival, you spot her dancing near the fire. Her teeth flash white in the glow. Or maybe that's just optimism. You want to believe they're perfect. Everyone does it first. The truth reveals itself later, when the candles burn low and the music fades. You catch a glimpse of the side of her mouth when she laughs too hard, dark at the gum line, the unmistakable shadow of decay. You love her anyway. You love her because decay feels honest. A mainstream historical fact softens the romance, but makes it real. Medieval lovers often exchanged gifts of scented herbs, cloves, and oranges, stuck with spices to mask bad breath. Breath itself was considered a measure of moral character, sweetness equated with purity, stench with sin. You realize, grimly amused, that your heart has chosen someone somewhere between the two. You spend the summer courting her, which mostly means walking, talking, and trying not to chew on the wrong side of your mouth. You learn her habits, how she hides her mouth when she laughs, how she breathes through her nose when she's nervous, how she never eats garlic even when the whole village reeks of it. She asks you once if your teeth hurt, and you tell her no, though your jaw throbs every night. You don't want her to see weakness, though you know she already suspects. Everyone has something to hide. It's what makes people human. You imagine her in her cottage, brushing her teeth with salt and sage, just as you do, both of you polishing away time's slow cruelty. A quirky historical tidbit drifts through your thoughts during one of your walks together. In parts of medieval France, couples would exchange breath prayers before marriage, whispered blessings into each other's mouths to ensure fertility and fidelity. You picture doing that with her, and instantly start laughing, because if the breath doesn't kill you, the awkwardness might. She laughs too, which makes you love her even more. For a moment, you forget the ache, the grit, the grind. You forget the world outside the circle of your shared laughter. But the ache returns, as it always does. By harvest season, one of your molars has begun to wobble, a small rebellion of bone and pain. You hide it for weeks until she notices you speaking less, chewing slower. "Show me," she says one evening as the sun sets behind the fields. You shake your head, embarrassed. She rolls her eyes and grabs your chin gently, tilting your face toward the light. "Ah," she murmurs, "a coward's tooth." She reaches into her apron and pulls out a sprig of clove. "Chew," she commands, "and pretend it's a kiss." You obey, because love has its hierarchy, and she's the queen of this little kingdom. The clove stings at first, then numbs the ache, leaving a taste both warm and bitter. She smiles, satisfied, and you realize she's seen this before, maybe in her father, maybe in everyone she's ever loved. Pain, here isn't a secret, it's a language. That night, lying awake beside the fading fire, you think about how love and rot are inseparable. Every beautiful thing in your world spoils quickly. Bread, fruit, affection, teeth. You wonder if love simply teaches people to pretend otherwise. The poets, you recall, never mention toothaches in their sonnets. They speak of eyes, of hearts, of divine longing, but never of the taste that follows a shared kiss when both of you have been drinking clove wine for hours. You suspect that's why love poems sound so clean. They're written by men who stopped smiling decades ago. The next day, she brings you a gift, a small pouch of dried rosemary and mint to keep near your pillow. "It's for dreams," she says, "and for smell." You thank her, pretending not to notice the double meaning. You hang it above your bed anyway. The scent fills the room, clean and sharp, and for a while you sleep without dreaming of pain. But even dreams have their humor. One night you dream that you and she are both toothsmiths, pulling each other's teeth one by one, until there's nothing left but laughter and gums. You wake smiling, despite yourself, the absurdity too perfect to mourn. Weeks pass. The ache becomes background noise. The way a clock's ticking disappears once you stop fighting it. You see her less often. Harvest keeps everyone busy. But when you do, she still smells of cloves and courage. One evening, you catch her laughing with another man, a tanner with strong hands and an even stronger jaw. For a moment, jealousy bites harder than your molar ever could. You walk away, half angry, half relieved. Love is complicated when both of you are crumbling. An open scholarly debate murmurs through your reflection that night. Did medieval people truly value oral beauty, or was it merely a literary fantasy imposed by poets? Some historians argue that perfect teeth were never the ideal, that health and breath mattered more than symmetry. Others insist that even in the mud and grime of the Middle Ages, a clean smile symbolized divine favor. You sit by the fire, rubbing your jaw, and think that both are true. People don't crave perfection, they crave the illusion of it long enough to be loved. The next morning, you visit the river. The water is cold, clear, indifferent. You cup some in your hands, rinse your mouth, and watch the ripples distort your reflection. You think of her breath, her laughter, the cloves, the vinegar. You think of how fragile desire is when every smile carries the risk of pain. Still, you smile at your reflection, a defiant, crooked grin that says you'd do it all again. Because love, like toothache, doesn't go away by wishing. It dulls, it hides, it returns, but it's always proof you've lived. You walk home with the sun on your back, and the taste of rosemary still on your tongue. The village smells of smoke and bread. Somewhere in the distance she's probably laughing again, and for once the thought doesn't hurt. Your tooth still aches. Of course it always will. But tonight it feels less like suffering and more like memory. You touch your jaw gently, whisper her name once, and keep walking. The ache hums along with your heartbeat, and you think, not without humor, that this is what love really is in your time. A pulse, a scent, a little rot wrapped in hope. By the time your next tooth gives out, you've stopped pretending that prayers and herbs can save it. The pain has turned from a sharp spark into a steady throb, a kind of slow, relentless reminder that you live in a body built for suffering. You sit in your cottage, staring at the broken molar you finally pulled out yourself last night with a piece of cloth, a knife, and the kind of courage that isn't bravery so much as exhaustion. It sits now in a bowl beside you, small and jagged, like a fragment of moonlight gone wrong. You ought to bury it, as people do, to keep the toothworm from finding its way back into your skull, but instead you keep it near the fire, fascinated by how something so tiny could command your entire attention for weeks. You run your thumb over its rough edges, imagining what might replace it someday. That thought isn't entirely fantasy. The rumors have been spreading for months. Some say a craftsman in Venice can replace missing teeth with ivory, bone, even gold. Others whisper that Egyptian traders carry false teeth made from animal jawbones tied with linen and sealed with resin. The idea sounds both miraculous and horrifying. Still, you can't help imagining it, smiling again without shame, biting into bread without fear, feeling whole in a world where wholeness feels like luxury. You pack your satchel with bread, coins, and hope, and set out toward the next town, where traveling surgeons are said to pass through twice a month. When you arrive, the square is loud with hawkers and healers shouting over one another. You spot him immediately, a man in a leather apron standing before a small crowd, his table laid out like an altar of agony. Tools of every shape glint in the sun. Iron hooks, tongs, thin needles, tiny saws. Above him hangs a sign painted with a jawbone and a gold tooth in the center, shining against the blue sky. Restoration, he calls out, rolling the word like fine wine. Renewal, rebirth of your smile. You almost laugh at the poetry of it. Renewal, in this age, is a dangerous promise. You watch as he works on a woman missing 2 front teeth. He heats a small wire in the flame of a lantern, twists it carefully, and ties it around her remaining teeth to anchor something pale and smooth bone, maybe, or ivory. The smell of singed linen drifts through the air. The crowd gasps. The woman cries, and then, somehow, she smiles. The replacement looks good from afar, though up close you can see the uneven edges, the way the color doesn't quite match. Still, the applause is real. You decide then that you'll do it. You hand him your coin, point to the gap in your mouth, and let him nod gravely like a priest accepting confession. He examines your mouth with a gentleness that feels almost kind. "You're lucky," he says. "It's a back tooth. Easier to fix. Less vanity, more function." He pulls from his pouch a small carved piece of bone, smoothed into a rough molar shape. "Boar's tusk," he explains proudly. "Strong. Holds better than gold. You don't know whether to feel honored or hunted." He wraps it with thin linen soaked in resin, then fits it into the empty space. The pressure is immediate, like being kissed by fire. You grip the sides of the chair, reminding yourself that you asked for this. He ties the linen tightly around the neighboring teeth, anchoring it into place. The smell of resin and sweat fills the air. "Don't eat for a day," he advises when he's done. "Don't laugh either. It might fall out." You manage a crooked smile anyway. You leave the square dazed, half dizzy with pain, half drunk on the miracle of having something back that you thought was gone forever. It doesn't quite feel like your own tooth. It's heavier somehow. Foreign, but it sits there quietly, solid and strange. You run your tongue over it again and again like a child testing a new word. The town air smells of spices and salt. For the first time in months, you feel like part of the world again, not apart from it. A mainstream historical fact makes this strange victory even more vivid. Early dental prosthetics did exist by the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, often made of animal bone, ivory, or even human teeth acquired from corpses or the poor. Gold wires were used to secure them, and though the materials were impressive, the hygiene was not. You remember this later when your mouth starts to ache. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the dull infection of survival. The gum around the false tooth swells, reddens, and begins to weep slightly. You rinse with wine and salt, whispering curses that sound suspiciously like prayers. You consider pulling it out, but can't bring yourself to. After all, this isn't just a tooth, it's hope, and hope is stubborn even when it festers. A week passes. The pain softens to an ache you can live with, and the new tooth settles in like an unwelcome tenant who's decided to pay rent in discomfort. You begin to notice things again: the sound of the mill wheel, the smell of baking bread, the laughter of children chasing geese through the mud. When you smile, people notice the gap less. You feel braver, lighter. Maybe it's working. Maybe this is what progress feels like: half miracle, half infection. A quirky historical tidbit drifts into your thoughts one evening as you chew gingerly on soft cheese. In Japan, around the same time, women of status stain their teeth black with a mixture of iron and vinegar, a custom called ohaguro, considered beautiful and refined. You imagine walking into your own village with blackened teeth, claiming it's fashionable, and the absurdity makes you laugh. Maybe the difference between beauty and madness is just geography. You take another sip of wine, wincing at the sting on your gums, and think that at least your false tooth is still in place. That's more than most can say. The traveling surgeon has long since moved on, and you're left to tend your new mouth alone. You polish the tooth with a rag soaked in vinegar and salt, hoping to keep it from turning gray. It gleams faintly in the firelight, an ivory crescent amid the dull ruins of your real teeth. You can't help feeling proud. You've joined the future, or at least a rough sketch of it. When the healer visits your village and sees it, she clucks her tongue, but can't hide her curiosity. "You've tempted God," she says softly, replacing what he took. You grin through the ache. "Then maybe he'll take the pain instead," you reply. She laughs, a short, surprised sound, and pats your cheek. "You always were a fool," she says kindly. That night, you dream that all your teeth turn to gold. You smile and the world glows. But when you wake, the glow is just firelight, and the gold is gone. Still, for a moment you taste it, warm, metallic, and endless. You realize then that vanity isn't the sin people think it is. It's survival. It's the need to look whole when everything inside you is falling apart. An open scholarly debate hums softly in your mind as you sit watching the fire burn low. Did medieval dental replacements truly serve function, or were they purely cosmetic displays for the rich? Some scholars say nobles used gold and ivory simply to flaunt wealth, while others insist these early experiments laid the groundwork for real dentistry. You decide both are right. Every invention starts as vanity, and every vanity becomes necessity in time. You touch the false tooth again, feeling how smooth it is under your tongue, how different it feels from the rest. It's imperfect, yes, but it's something, and in your world, something is everything. You close your eyes and breathe through the ache, half in gratitude, half in defiance. The night hums quietly around you, filled with the same stubborn rhythm as your pulse. You think of all the people who've ever smiled through pain. Peasants, nobles, lovers, monks, and realize you're one of them now, bound together by gold, bone, and linen, by the fragile illusion that what breaks can still be rebuilt. You smile again, careful but certain, and let the fire fade into the hush of the dark. You first hear her name whispered through a wall of pain. Apollonia. Someone says it at the tavern one night, while clutching his jaw, and the sound of it rolls through the air like a prayer, half remembered, half despair. Saint Apollonia, patron of teeth and agony, martyred for refusing to renounce her faith. According to the tale, her tormentors broke every tooth in her mouth before setting her ablaze, and yet she went to her death willingly, serene and smiling. You wince as you picture it, partly out of reverence, partly out of pure sympathy. In your century, people believe she listens to toothache sufferers the way a mother listens to crying children. So when your own mouth begins to pulse again, sharp, rhythmic, unbearable, you decide it's time to meet her. You walk to the chapel at dawn, when the mist still curls around the fields like unspun wool. The air smells of damp stone and candle wax. Inside, the only light comes from the red votive flames flickering before her wooden statue. She's carved delicately, her head slightly tilted, holding a small pair of pincers in one hand and a tooth in the other, serene even in mutilation. You kneel on the cold floor, press your hand to your cheek, and whisper something between confession and bargaining. If you're listening, you murmur, "I'd give you one tooth gladly, if you'd just let the rest alone." Behind you, an old woman coughs softly. She's the chapel keeper, a small figure wrapped in wool, smelling of frankincense and salt. Say her name 3 times, she instructs. It draws her closer. You obey. Apollonia, Apollonia, Apollonia. The syllables sting your tongue like cloves, and for a moment you swear the ache in your jaw eases. She nods, satisfied, and offers you a taper to light. Fire calls her faster than words, she says. You light it, the wax melting instantly, the flame shivering as if unsure. Now, she continues, spit into the flame, just once, for luck. You hesitate, then do it, feeling absurd but also strangely hopeful. The air fills with the faint hiss of moisture meeting fire. The chapel smells briefly of smoke, and something almost sweet. A mainstream historical fact gives weight to your small ritual. Saint Apollonia was indeed invoked across medieval Europe for centuries, and people would touch their aching jaws while calling her name, or even wear tiny gold or silver teeth as charms in her honor. Her relics, supposed fragments of her teeth, were carried in processions and touched to the sick. Some claimed the mere sight of her image could quiet pain. You glance at the statue again. Her wooden smile is calm, unflinching. You envy her peace. That evening, back in your cottage, the pain returns with its old arrogance. But now you have a new trick. You whisper her name, trace the shape of a tooth in the air, and wait. It doesn't stop the ache, but it changes something inside you, turns suffering into ritual. You find comfort in repetition, in the illusion of control. You even carve a small token of her for yourself, a crude likeness on a piece of driftwood, which you hang near your bed. When you wake in the middle of the night, jaw throbbing, you stare at it and think, you know this pain better than anyone. Keep me company through it. A few days later, you meet a traveling friar, who claims to have seen her miracle firsthand. In Florence, he says, a man prayed to her for 7 nights straight, and his tooth fell out clean on the 8th. No pain, no blood. He smiles, revealing a mouth that looks like a battlefield. You're skeptical, but also desperate. 7 nights, you ask. Yes, he says, but you must fast from salt and meat, and you must not speak of pain during that time. You try it. By the 4th night, your stomach growls louder than your jaw aches. By the 5th, you're convinced the saint is testing your sense of humor. On the 7th, nothing happens except that you've learned the fine art of silent suffering. Still, you whisper your thanks. Maybe the lesson wasn't healing, but endurance. That week, you carve her symbol, a small tooth between pincers into the lintel of your door. The neighbors notice. Soon, they start asking if she listens faster when prayed to aloud or in secret, if she prefers candles or coins, if wine works better than water for offerings. You don't have answers, but you like being asked. It makes your pain feel purposeful, like you're part of something holy. Before long, half the village has little tooth charms hanging from windows or strung around necks. Even the blacksmith melts scraps of silver into tooth-shaped amulets, selling them to travelers. Suffering, you realize, is contagious, but so is hope. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind as you watch the trend spread. In parts of medieval Germany, people dedicated their first lost tooth to Saint Apollonia by throwing it into the fire, believing it would prevent future pain. Children would chant rhymes to her, half nursery song, half exorcism. You try it once, just to see. Saint Apollonia, bright and kind, take this tooth and leave me mine. You feel ridiculous, but the rhyme sticks in your head, looping quietly through the night like a lullaby for the desperate. One afternoon, as you're fetching water from the well, a stranger approaches, a merchant dressed in red velvet, smiling too widely. His teeth gleam unnaturally white. You've heard of Saint Apollonia, yes? He asks. You nod. She helps those who honor her, he says smoothly, but she favors gold most of all. He opens his palm to reveal a ring shaped like her symbol, the tiny tooth and pincers glinting in the sun. Touch it to your mouth, and pain will flee. You ask the price, and it's laughable, more coin than you'll see in a year. Faith, he says, is never free. You smile thinly. Neither is deceit. You walk away, amused by how faith breeds business as easily as prayer breeds patience. That night, you sit by the fire and look at your own crude carving, smoke curling around its wooden face. You realize something. It's not the saint that helps, it's the story. The idea that someone once suffered worse than you and faced it with grace makes your pain feel smaller, bearable, almost noble. You think of her standing before her tormentors, teeth falling like pearls, smiling as if she were already free. Maybe faith is just learning to suffer beautifully. An open scholarly debate hums through your weary mind as the fire fades. Historians argue whether saints like Apollonia represented divine compassion or were used to justify the inevitability of pain. Was she a healer or merely a reminder to endure? You decide she's both. Her story doesn't promise relief, it promises dignity, and sometimes that's the greater mercy. You fall asleep at last, the carving watching over you in the dim glow of embers. Your jaw still aches, but the ache feels quieter now, shared across centuries with a woman who once burned for her faith and smiled anyway. You whisper her name one last time before sleep takes you. Apollonia. The word slips through the dark like a candle flame in wind, fragile but steady. For a moment, you almost believe the pain has learned how to pray too. You wake to the sound of horns in the distance. Not church bells this time, but the raw call of war. The village is stirring. Men gather at the square with pikes and crossbows. And you, despite the dull ache in your jaw, are among them. The Lord has summoned his levy again, and no toothache in Christendom can excuse you from the march. You tighten your belt, sling your pack over your shoulder, and join the line. The morning air tastes of iron, old blood on wind, maybe, or just your imagination, but you bite down, testing your false molar, and it holds. You whisper a quick thank you to both the toothsmith and Saint Apollonia, then laugh softly, realizing you've started praying for your jaw before your soul. The road stretches long and gray, beneath a pale sky. Your teeth chatter from cold or fear. You can't tell which. The men around you joke, spit, curse, chew hard bread that could chip stone, and every time someone laughs, it sounds like defiance. One of them, a tall miller's son, offers you a strip of dried meat. You chew slowly, painfully, feeling the leather-like flesh grind against your gums. Hurts, he asks. You nod. Good, he says with a grin. Means you're still alive. He's right, in a way. Pain is proof of presence out here, where too many will leave pieces of themselves on the battlefield. By midday, your jaw throbs in rhythm with the drumbeat of marching feet. The pain becomes a metronome, keeping you moving. When you stop to rest, you dip your hand into the water barrel, splash your face, and notice that every man nearby has the same look, the open-mouthed breathing of exhaustion, lips cracked, teeth stained by wine and worry. There's a strange unity in it. War erases class faster than plague. The noble and the peasant both end up chewing on fear. That night, the campfire crackles under a sky stitched with stars. You sit beside the blacksmith, who now wears a soldier's tabard instead of his apron. He's sharpening a sword with the same care he once used for pliers. You ever hear the saying, he mutters without looking up, that a warrior's strength lives in his jaw? You shake your head. He grins, revealing a line of missing teeth. It's true. You clench your teeth when you charge. You grit them when you fight. You bite down when you want to live. Break the jaw, break the man. You glance at him, wondering if he's quoting wisdom or experience. So, he adds, tapping his cheekbone with the flat of the blade, take care of yours. There's more courage in a closed mouth than in a shouted oath. A mainstream historical fact flickers through the firelight. In medieval warfare, broken jaws were among the most common injuries, often caused by blunt weapons or falling from horses. Surgeons of the time treated them with bandages soaked in wine or egg whites, sometimes wiring the teeth together with silver or gold if the patient was lucky enough to afford it. You think of your own mouth, wired not with gold but with stubbornness, and decide it's enough. The next morning, you march again, this time into smoke. The battle is chaos, noise, dust, and the metallic taste of adrenaline. You barely remember the details later, only flashes, the sun glinting on helmets, the shouts, the shock of impact when sword meets shield. Somewhere in the middle of it all, you take a blow to the face. It's not direct, just the backhand swing of a fleeing soldier, but it lands hard enough to rattle your skull. The world tilts sideways. You taste blood. You spit, and see pink foam spatter your boot. You run your tongue along your teeth, some loose, one missing. The false molar, surprisingly, still holds. You laugh through the pain, half delirious. It's absurd that the only part of you unbroken is the one made from a boar. You wake hours later, under a torn tent, jaw bandaged, head pounding. The surgeon crouched beside you, smells of vinegar and horsehair. You're lucky, he says, tightening the wrap. Could have lost half your face. He hands you a rag soaked in wine. Bite this if it hurts. You smile weakly if it hurts. He leaves to tend to another man screaming somewhere nearby. You look around and realize how many are bandaged, just like you. Cheeks wrapped, jaws braced, mouths stitched shut by necessity. The camp smells like blood and salt, like the inside of a mouth too big for its own body. By evening, you can't eat. can't speak, can barely move your tongue. You sip thin broth and think about home, the monastery, the fair, the toothsmith's hammer. You think about Brother Alaric's words, that pain is prayer, and wonder if the saints can hear soldiers. Maybe Apollonia listens to them too. These jaw-shattered warriors, chewing on silence. You imagine her walking among the tents, her ghostly fingers brushing across faces, whispering, "Endure." A quirky historical tidbit surfaces amid your pain. Some knights reportedly carried talismans carved with teeth or jawbones into battle, believing they brought strength and protection. One French chronicle even mentions a knight who wore a necklace of human teeth taken from fallen foes, claiming it made him fearless. You shiver, not from disgust but from understanding. When everything around you falls apart, superstition feels like armor. You touch the small wooden carving of Apollonia hanging from your neck and whisper her name. The next day you wake to birdsong and silence. The battle has ended, though no one seems to know who won. The survivors move slowly, carrying the wounded on makeshift litters. You stand shakily, jaw still bandaged, and join them. Every step echoes in your skull. You look around and realize that pain is the great equalizer. Everyone limps, bleeds, clutches something broken. You see the blacksmith again, his arm in a sling, his grin now toothless. "Told you," he says hoarsely, "strength in the jaw." You both laugh, though it hurts too much to continue. By the time you return home weeks later, you've learned a new kind of quiet. You eat only soft bread and soup. You don't sing. You don't curse. You just breathe and heal. The false tooth still sits in your mouth like a relic, a souvenir of foolish pride and survival. Every time you bite, you remember the field, the scream of iron, the smell of earth, the taste of blood. You remember the surgeon's hands, trembling as they tied bandages, and the way the stars looked above the smoke, clear, distant, unmoved. An open scholarly debate hums in the background of your recovery. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers truly had higher pain tolerance or if they simply lacked alternatives to endurance. Was courage born of faith or necessity? You decide it doesn't matter. The body learns what it must. The soul catches up later. One evening, you stand at your door watching the sunset. The air smells of rain, grass, and distant fires, familiar human scents. You run your tongue over your teeth, counting what remains. Each one feels like a story, each gap a memory. You smile, crooked but proud. You've survived the battlefield and the barber, the worm and the saint. You've learned that courage isn't in clenched fists or sharpened swords. It's in the quiet grind of molars holding through the noise. You exhale, and for the first time in weeks, your jaw doesn't ache. It feels still. You close your eyes and let that silence settle inside you like peace, knowing the war will live forever in your teeth. But tonight they rest.
The first sign isn't the bell. It's the silence. The marketplace that once rang with hammers and laughter now sounds like the inside of a coffin, muffled, still, and waiting. You walk through streets that smell of smoke and vinegar, the twin perfumes of panic. The plague has come again. It always comes again. The healers burn bundles of rosemary in every doorway. Priests walk by swinging censers heavy with incense that does little more than disguise the scent of rot. You keep a cloth over your mouth soaked in wine, though it's not faith that drives you, just fear. Somewhere behind that cloth, your teeth throb again, a familiar pain in an unfamiliar world. The toothache feels almost comforting now, a reminder that you're still alive enough to hurt. The barber-surgeons' shop is closed, a red cross painted across the door. They say he died 2 nights ago, mid-extraction, the patient surviving just long enough to flee. You shake your head. In a world dying from within, there's still time for irony. The only person working now is the gravedigger, and even he jokes that business is too good. You visit the church, but even the saints seem weary. Saint Apollonia's statue has been wrapped in linen to protect her from infection, which feels both tender and absurd. You kneel anyway, jaw aching, whispering that if she truly understands suffering, she'll forgive you for questioning the point of prayer. Outside, the wind carries a rumor. The dead are being buried with their mouths stuffed with herbs to keep the soul from escaping through the teeth. You laugh quietly. Pain has made you cynical, but when your neighbor's wife dies, you see it yourself. The parish priest sprinkles her with salt and tucks sage leaves between her lips. For purity, he says, maybe for silence too. The smell of decay is everywhere now, sweet and unbearable. You remember the fairs and the feasts, the golden sugar towers, the toothsmith's hammer, the clove-scented kisses, and think how absurd it all seems in a world where no one dares breathe deeply. A mainstream historical fact presses through your thoughts like a shadow. During the Black Death, people genuinely believed that foul air, miasma, carried the sickness, so they stuffed their mouths with herbs, garlic, or cloth soaked in vinegar to cleanse each breath. Some even sealed their lips with wax during funerals. The living feared the mouths of the dead as much as death itself. You walk past the plague pits on the edge of town, and the air seems to hum with this fear of breath, of smell, of invisible hunger. You pull your hood tighter and move faster, tasting ashes on your tongue. When the sickness finally finds your village, it does not knock, it seeps. One morning, you wake to find the blacksmith's forge cold, the mill wheel still, the fields deserted. You close your shutters and live inside the sound of your own breathing. The toothache returns, sharp and insistent, almost mocking. You think of the worm again, wondering if it's back, gnawing at your nerves in rhythm with death itself. For days, you speak to no one. You mix a rinse of wine and sage, muttering that at least you can control this one infection. The irony isn't lost on you. You sip the mixture, swish, spit, repeat, a ritual of defiance in a world where ritual is all that's left. The days blur. Sometimes you hear the carts at night, wheels crunching over stones, carrying bodies to the pits. You think you can hear the teeth clattering faintly inside the shrouds. Your imagination, maybe, but one night, you dream that the dead rise with perfect smiles, every cavity filled, every jaw unbroken. They march past your window, grinning like saints. You wake sweating, half laughing, half crying, realizing that even your nightmares have begun inventing dentists. Then, just as quickly as it came, the plague begins to wane. The carts slow, the bells fall silent, the air clears. The survivors crawl out from their homes like worms from damp soil, blinking at the sunlight as if it's a miracle. You step outside, thinner, older, but still alive. The first thing you do is breathe deeply, then regret it. The world still smells faintly of rot and smoke. The second thing you do is check your teeth. You press your tongue against each one like counting prayer beads. They're all still there, though one feels loose. You laugh softly. Survival always costs something. Weeks later, a stranger arrives in the village, a man with a satchel full of tools and a confidence too clean for these times. He calls himself a dentator, a new word for a new age. He claims he can treat the mouth without bloodletting, using powders, oils, and strange silver instruments. People gather to watch him as if he were a magician. He demonstrates by polishing a farmer's teeth with crushed coral and vinegar until they gleam unnaturally white. Health begins in the mouth, he proclaims. The crowd nods as though hearing a sermon. You hang back, curious but cautious. He sees you, of course. They always see the doubters. You've suffered, he says, pointing to your jaw. You nod. Come, he beckons. I can ease it. You sit reluctantly, half expecting pain, half hoping for a miracle. He examines your teeth, tutting like a priest judging sin. Then he produces a small metal probe, thin, curved, almost elegant, and scrapes gently at the base of your molars. The sensation is strange, sharp, but not unbearable. When he finishes, he rinses your mouth with a bitter solution that stings and numbs all at once. Alum and myrrh, he says proudly, cleanses infection. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces to make sense of him. After the Black Death, the first self-declared dentatores appeared across Europe, barber-surgeons who specialized in oral hygiene, scraping plaque, and experimenting with rudimentary fillings. They traveled from plague-scarred towns, preaching cleanliness as divine defense, the earliest whispers of dentistry as a craft separate from but born of chaos. You study him, realizing he's both healer and salesman, faith and function in one body. When he leaves, you touch your jaw. The pain is gone. Not entirely, but lighter, as if someone opened a window in your skull. You don't know whether to trust the cure or the calm, but for the first time in years, you feel something close to gratitude. The plague has taken neighbors, family, faith, but it's also left something behind, a hunger to understand, to fix, to rebuild. Maybe this, you think, is what the dawn looks like after so much darkness, a man with polished tools and too much confidence offering to clean the mouth of the world. An open scholarly debate hums like the wind through empty streets. Did the Black Death truly give rise to new medicine, or did it simply force humanity to value survival more than superstition? Were the dentatores pioneers or opportunists? You can't say. You just know that people who face death begin to treat life differently. They start with what they can see, what they can touch, their own bodies, their own teeth, and rebuild from there. That night, you sit by the fire, chewing soft bread without wincing, marveling at the ease. You think about the plague, the saints, the worm, the war, the sugar, all the things that have passed through your mouth and shaped your years. You smile, hesitant but genuine, and whisper into the quiet, "Health begins in the mouth." The words sound strange in your voice, but true enough to keep. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the smell of earth and rain instead of rot. You close your eyes, resting your head on your hand, and let the silence of the living fill your lungs. The ache doesn't return that night. For the first time in months, your sleep tastes clean. The world has begun to smell different. Not of rot or incense anymore, but of something sharper, vinegar, citrus, and the faint metallic tang of progress. You walk through the market square, and where once stood stalls of prayer charms and worm candles, there are now tables covered with glass jars, powders, and strange copper instruments that glint in the morning light. The plague years have ended, and with them, the patience for mystery. This is the new age, people say, the age of reason, of invention, of remedies. Even your toothache, which has faithfully followed you through famine and faith, seems suddenly out of fashion. You pass a sign nailed to a post, "Doctor of the Mouth, cleanings, fillings, and powders for the whiteness of the teeth." The letters are printed, not painted. The age of hand-scrawled prayers has given way to the age of printing presses, and even pain has learned to advertise. You step inside the apothecary's shop, drawn by curiosity more than hope. The air is warm, thick with the scent of rosemary, lemon peel, and something chemical you can't name. Behind the counter stands a man wearing spectacles and a velvet cap, a beard trimmed so precisely it looks like geometry. He greets you with a smile so bright it borders on arrogance. "Toothache?" he says, without waiting for an answer. You nod. "Ah," he murmurs, "the last medieval affliction." He opens a drawer and begins taking out jars. "We can fix that now." The way he says fix sounds revolutionary, as if pain itself were an outdated technology. He shows you a paste of crushed coral, salt, and vinegar. "Brush it gently along the enamel with a cloth each morning," he explains. "It removes stains and strengthens the nerves." You frown. "Brush?" He nods. "With cloth, or, if you can afford one, a toothbrush." The word feels foreign in your mouth. He pulls one from the shelf, a small stick tipped with boar bristles, bound tightly with twine. You stare at it like a relic of the future. He grins. "Imported from China," he says. "Very modern." You can't help laughing softly, partly from disbelief, partly from the absurd joy of living long enough to see such a thing. A mainstream historical fact underscores his boast. By the 15th century, the earliest toothbrushes truly were appearing in Europe, modeled after Chinese designs. Some were carved from bone or ivory, their bristles made of animal hair. The wealthy ordered them as luxury items, often engraved with initials like jewelry. You turn the brush over in your hand, imagining nobles scrubbing their decayed mouths with imported bristles, pretending they've invented cleanliness. The apothecary sees your amusement and shrugs. Vanity, he says, is often the first step toward health. You nod. He's not wrong. He offers to show you a new technique, fillings made from beeswax mixed with powdered silver. For cavities, he says, tapping the side of his own immaculate teeth, a bit of heat, a steady hand, and you'll feel young again. You eye the tiny iron spoon he holds, glowing faintly from the brazier, and decide youth can wait. Perhaps the paste first, you suggest. He laughs. Caution, he says, another medieval habit. He wraps the jar in paper and sends you on your way with more confidence than faith. Outside, the streets hum with this new energy, merchants shouting about imported spices, printers hawking pamphlets about anatomy and astrology, scholars arguing about whether the body is a machine or a miracle. You pass a bookseller's stall and notice a slim volume titled De Humani Corporis Fabrica. The illustration on the cover shows a man peeling back his own skin to reveal the muscles beneath. You think of Brother Alaric's old manuscripts, the worms, the charms, and realize how far the world has come in a single lifetime. Now people want to see what's underneath, not what's divine. You feel both awe and dread. That evening, you sit by candlelight and open the jar of coral paste. It smells faintly of lemon and metal. You wrap a strip of linen around your finger, dip it into the mixture, and rub it carefully across your teeth. The sensation is gritty, sharp, but not unpleasant. You spit into the fire, watching the sparks hiss and rise, and feel strangely proud of yourself. You're participating in progress, one grain of coral at a time. The next morning, your mouth feels cleaner, fresher somehow, though your gums bleed a little when you rinse. The apothecary warned you that was a good sign. You decide to believe him. A few weeks later, a peddler passes through your village selling small glass bottles filled with clear liquid. Elixir for the breath, he calls, perfumed spirit of mint and clove. You buy one. It burns like holy fire but leaves behind a sweetness that feels civilized, almost divine. You catch yourself breathing more confidently when speaking to others, as though progress itself has freshened your lungs. Even your neighbors begin noticing the change. More people visiting the apothecary, more linen cloths stained pink from coral paste. The village smells faintly of mint now instead of smoke and garlic. Civilization has arrived through the mouth. A quirky historical tidbit flits through your mind as you polish your teeth one morning. Renaissance barbers and physicians began displaying anatomical models of jaws in their shops, carved from wax or ivory to teach proper care. Some were decorative, painted with gold veins, others purely practical. You imagine a future where the human mouth will be mapped like a kingdom, every tooth named and numbered. The thought makes you smile. For once, smiling doesn't hurt. But progress, like sugar, comes with hidden decay. Within months, a new vanity spreads, people mixing their own whitening powders from alum, vinegar, and pumice stone. You try one, curious, and instantly regret it. The enamel burns, your gums protest, you spit blood and laugh bitterly. The last medieval affliction, indeed. Pain, it seems, evolves faster than medicine. You return to the apothecary, who clucks his tongue. Moderation, he scolds gently. Science can't save fools. He mixes you a soothing rinse of chamomile and honey, murmuring that the ancients knew a thing or two after all. You leave with your mouth still sore, but your faith oddly restored. Maybe the truth isn't that the old ways were wrong, but that no age can resist believing it knows better than the one before. An open scholarly debate lingers in your thoughts as you walk home through the golden light of late afternoon. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance truly revolutionized medicine or merely repackaged medieval wisdom with better tools. Did progress begin with invention or with marketing? You decide it doesn't matter. What matters is that people have started trying again, scraping, rinsing, inventing, daring to believe that decay can be postponed. That night, you stand before the mirror, real glass, polished smooth, and study your reflection. The candlelight gleams off your teeth, not perfect, but brighter. You smile at yourself. not with vanity, but with quiet gratitude. You've lived long enough to see a world where people fight decay not with prayer, but with bristles and coral dust. You know the pain will return eventually, it always does, but for now, you taste salt, mint, and hope. And for the first time in your long, aching life, the future doesn't scare you, it tastes clean.
By the time spring ripens again, your shelf has turned into a museum of failed miracles. Little jars of coral paste sit beside half-empty bottles of mint spirit. A cracked toothbrush missing half its bristles leans against a bowl of ashes you keep meaning to throw away. You've lived long enough to see every generation invent its own idea of cleanliness, each one convinced it's the final answer. This morning, as sunlight spills through the window and dust motes dance like forgotten prayers, you decide to start over again, to find something gentler, simpler. The apothecary's powders have left your gums raw, and the bristle brush has scraped away more pride than plaque. You stare at the ashes cooling in the hearth, and remember your grandmother's words. The old ways never die, they just wait for you to tire of new ones. So you take a pinch of gray ash between your fingers, fine, silky, strangely soft, and mix it with a few drops of water until it becomes a paste. The smell is faintly metallic, clean in a primitive way. You rub it across your teeth with your finger, slowly, carefully. It's gritty, yes, but it feels honest, like stone against bone. When you rinse with warm water, the taste is not mint or lemon, but earth itself, pure and ancient. For a moment you feel as though you've stepped backward through time, to when people trusted the ground more than glass jars. You smile at your reflection in the small bronze mirror. Your teeth aren't whiter, but they look real. Yours, that's enough. Later, at the market, you overhear two merchants arguing about a new craze in Florence, tooth powder made from burnt bread and ivory dust. One swears it makes your smile shine like marble. The other claims it costs more than a cow. You can't resist. Curiosity is your oldest vice. The next day, you trade a small silver button for a pinch of it wrapped in parchment. It glitters faintly in the light, a soft beige with a ghostly sheen. At home, you mix it with a drop of rosewater and brush carefully. The taste is luxurious, delicate, nothing like ashes. For a fleeting second, you see yourself as others might, civilized, refined, touched by progress. Then the bleeding starts again. You spit pink into the basin and laugh until your jaw aches. Vanity, you think, always comes at market price. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind as the laughter fades. During the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, tooth powders made from ground bone, charcoal, pumice, and even ivory became fashionable among the wealthy. Some formulas added sugar or spices for scent, ironically worsening decay. Apothecaries sold them in engraved tins, advertising purity and elegance. It was the birth of an industry, not just a hygiene. You imagine the merchants of the future endless rows of shining jars, each promising what none can deliver, a painless smile. Still, not all progress is empty. You meet a traveler from Venice who claims to have studied oral medicine under a physician who lectures on the anatomy of the jaw. He carries sketches of teeth drawn with precision, labeled like constellations. Each one, he says, pointing to a page, is a machine with its own clockwork. You marvel at the idea, teeth as gears of creation, grinding food and time alike. He gives you a small gift, a sliver of soft ivory carved into the shape of a tooth. Keep it on you, he says, for balance. The body learns by imitation. You tie it around your neck, amused but oddly comforted. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces as you watch him leave. Ivory teeth were once worn as jewelry in parts of Italy, charms against aging and envy. Some even believed that sleeping with one under your pillow could ward off nightmares or tooth loss. You smile at the thought of a world where superstition and science hold hands like old lovers, still quarreling, but inseparable. Weeks pass, and you settle into a rhythm somewhere between faith and pragmatism. You clean your mouth with ashes every morning, follow it with a rinse of salt water, and rub your gums with sage at night. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and it works. The ache visits you less often, like an old friend who's run out of stories. The villagers begin asking for advice, what you use, what you eat, whether the ivory charm truly works. You tell them the truth. Nothing works forever. They nod, satisfied anyway. Hope you realize doesn't need proof. It just needs ritual. One evening, you sit by the fire, carving a piece of wood into a rough comb for your hair. As the shavings fall, you notice how similar they look to the ivory dust in your old jar. You pick up a handful and toss them into the fire, watching them curl and vanish. The smell of burning wood fills the room, blending with the faint sweetness of rosewater lingering on your breath. You think about how everything you've ever used to clean yourself, salt, ash, ivory, bread, once belonged to something else. Every act of care is a kind of transformation, destruction turned ritual. Maybe that's what keeps humanity going, this endless cycle of burning, grinding and starting again. The apothecary visits your village one last time that year, this time with bottles of something he calls elixir of enamel. You smile as he demonstrates, pouring the clear liquid into a crystal cup and swirling it like wine. It strengthens the teeth, he says, makes them immortal. You laugh. Then I'll have no need of saints, you reply. He frowns, not used to being doubted. Science is the new faith, he insists. You tilt your head, and what does it pray to? He doesn't answer. You buy nothing but wish him luck anyway. That night you dream again of your teeth, but not falling out, not breaking. They're growing, slowly, curling into vines that sprout flowers of ivory and ash. The blossoms open, releasing a faint scent of mint and fire. You wake smiling, the dream clinging to you like a benediction. Your jaw doesn't ache. Your mouth feels strange, empty of pain, full of quiet. An open scholarly debate drifts through your thoughts as dawn seeps through the shutters. Historians still argue whether these late medieval and early Renaissance remedies truly improved oral health or merely delayed decay. Did the rise of cosmetics mask a deeper disease, or did small daily rituals, rinsing, brushing, burning, genuinely mark the beginning of prevention? You decide both are true. Beauty and healing have always shared the same mirror. The reflection just depends on the light. You walk outside into the pale morning, the world smelling of thawed soil and distant sea. The village blacksmith waves, flashing a grin of mismatched teeth that gleam like relics of survival. You grin back, imperfect but sincere. The ivory charm at your neck catches the light, and for a moment it feels like the past itself smiling through you. Ash and bone, science and superstition, all polished into something human. You run your tongue across your teeth, tasting salt and smoke, and whisper softly, still here. Then you head toward the mill, the sun rising behind you, gilding the world in warmth that feels for once clean. The years settle into your bones, the way tart wine settles in an old cask. Slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've become a story yourself. The village has changed again. Children run through the square, holding sticks carved like toothbrushes, and even the poorest peasants chew mint leaves after meals because someone said it keeps the devil from nesting in their mouths. The apothecary's shop is now run by his son, a bookish man with ink on his cuffs and less patience for miracles. He sells powders labeled in Latin, and pamphlets printed with diagrams of jaws that look almost mechanical. People speak of dental care now as though it were a duty like prayer or taxes. You can't help smiling at the irony. After all these decades of burning, bleeding, and bargaining, the world has finally decided that pain can be managed by routine. You watch the young ones fuss with their bristles and powders, and you feel something like pride. They'll never know the worm, the candle smoke, the fire-lit prayers. Their pain will be cleaner, tidier, almost respectable. You still have most of your teeth, crooked, worn, but loyal. The false molar has long since fallen out and been replaced by nothing at all. When you chew, it's like tapping one note missing from a song you've sung too long to forget. You think of every age you've lived through, every theory people have dreamed up to explain why the mouth aches, worms, demons, humors, bad air, divine punishment, imbalance of the moon, or simply fate. And through it all, the same truth. No one ever escapes the slow conversation between body and time. Each tooth is just a line in that dialogue, written in enamel, rewritten in ache. Sometimes, when the nights grow cold and you can't sleep, you light a single candle and place it on the table beside your cup of salt water. You touch the scarred place on your gum where the boar's tusk once sat, and whisper thanks to the healers and charlatans, to the saints and surgeons, to everyone who tried. Progress isn't a straight road, you think. It's a row of teeth, each one cracked, replaced, or forgotten, but all part of one bite. You laugh softly at the thought. The candle flickers. The flame is the same honey color as the candle that once smoked honey into your aching jaw when you first believed in worms. Memory tastes sweet again, for a moment. One afternoon, a traveler arrives selling spectacles. You try on a pair, and the world sharpens around the edges. Leaves, faces, the shimmer of water on the mill race. You catch your reflection in a polished brass plate, and see the fine cracks on your teeth glowing like old marble veined with light. You realize that even imperfection has its beauty. You think of Saint Apollonia, her calm, carved smile. You think of the soldier's grin on the battlefield, the apothecary's glass jars, the coral dust, the ivory charm. Every face of pain has become familiar, every cure an echo of the same hope to keep something of yourself intact against the slow undoing of time. You sip wine, savoring its warmth, and for once the sting doesn't come. A mainstream historical fact lingers like an aftertaste. By the 16th century, the first printed dental manuals were circulating in Europe, blending anatomy, hygiene, and art. Leonardo himself sketched the jaw with the precision of an engineer. Somewhere, you think, people are finally beginning to treat the mouth not as a mystery, but as a map. You imagine them centuries from now, wearing clean white coats, working with light instead of fire, whispering reassurance to patients who no longer believe in worms. The thought makes you smile, an old uneven smile, but one that still belongs wholly to you. A quirky tidbit flickers in your memory. The peasants once used ashes from burned mouse bones mixed with honey as toothpaste, believing mice carried resilience in their tiny jaws. You laugh softly at how far you've come, and how far you haven't. Every generation carries its superstition like a keepsake, polishing it with reason but never truly letting it go. Perhaps that's why the toothache persists. It's history's favorite way of reminding people they're alive. An open scholarly debate hums in your head like a lullaby. Some say pain evolves with civilization, that comfort simply makes us more aware of what remains imperfect. Others argue the opposite, that progress dulls the edge of suffering, letting humanity dream longer before it bites again. You lean toward the first. Pain, you think, is the one inheritance that never decays. It passes through bloodlines like enamel through bone. But so does endurance, and endurance, unlike enamel, can grow back. You sit at the window as evening falls, watching the mist rise over the fields. The air smells faintly of mint and smoke, a blend of old and new worlds. The bell from the chapel rings vespers, slow and hollow, and somewhere in that sound you hear the echo of every hum, every hiss, every curse whispered through clenched teeth across the centuries. You close your eyes, resting your jaw in your hand, and let the rhythm of it steady you. The world feels quieter now, softer. The ache that once defined your days has faded to a memory, an old melody you can still hum but no longer need to sing. The wind down comes gently, like the taste of warm milk after a long meal. You breathe through your nose, slow and deliberate, feeling the cool air brush against the back of your throat. Each breath reminds you that the mouth is not just for words or hunger. It's for life itself, the first and last gate of the body. The fire has burned low, painting the room in amber. Shadows move across the floor like ghosts of everything you've chewed through. Bread, laughter, prayer, fear. You let your jaw unclench, the muscles softening after decades of holding the world together. The silence tastes sweet. Outside, an owl calls once. Then again, its rhythm calm and certain. You imagine your teeth sleeping beneath your gums, lined like little white tombstones, each one at peace after centuries of war. You smile at the absurdity of the image, and keep smiling because it feels good, natural, easy. Somewhere far away, a new day is already dawning, a world of clean water, soft brushes, and gentle voices telling children to remember to rinse. You hope they do. You close your eyes and lean back, feeling the weight of your years settle like dust across your skin. Not heavy, just quiet. The warmth of the candle fades, replaced by the slow heartbeat of the earth outside your window. For the first time in a lifetime, your mouth is still. No ache, no hum, no hunger, just breath and peace. You whisper once more, softly, like a secret. Still here. The candle wavers, the air cools, and the room drifts into silence. Sweet dreams.